Go. Hi there. Good evening, everyone. It's so good to see you on this cold evening. It's cold in Salem, Oregon. Probably not so much in Kenya or Uganda or the Philippines. Probably Berlin's as cold as we are. But, I was thinking recently, God has a plan for each and every one of us. And it's so easy to start looking around and thinking you're alone. God doesn't even know you're down here. And, she was signaling me. I'm sorry. Get back to my point. And then I think of Noah and his wife and his 3 sons and their wives. And that's what aloneness must have been like. If you stop and think that many Bible people believe that the Earth's population was about 1 billion when the flood happened. And I've always kind of thought of it as there were a few scattered villages here and there, and that was about it. No, it was a large population, and out of that entire population, there was one family. The righteous remnant was one family that held on fiercely to their relationship with God. And God saw them and picked them out. Out of 1 billion people, he picked 8 to put in this ark and to save them. And I think when you look at the Garden of Eden, Jesus wasn't there. And I don't think that's an oversight. I think that's the way God wanted it, because God left all this time for you and for me and for everybody else to be able to get around to making the right choices and being like Noah and choosing God. That was my thought for the day. So we're ready now to start chapter 7. And I want to immediately go to verse 11 in chapter 7. And remember some of the factors of the relationship God had with Noah and his families. Noah found favor with God. Noah walked with God. The animals came to Noah. Noah didn't go out and run around the world chasing down animals. They all came to him. God closed the door to the ark. Now, number one, that shows the loving hands of God, because what he shuts cannot be opened, and what he opens cannot be shut. And so God shut that door the way it should have been shut. And at the same time, it really shows the trust that Noah had, that he was happy to have God close that door. And he didn't feel insecure at all that he didn't close the door. So you have this relationship. God made a covenant with Noah. God doesn't make covenants every other hour or so. He's made a few. But one of them that he made was with Noah, showing how special and how chosen and how much in the sight of God Noah was. And each and every one of us have that same relationship. God sees you, he knows you, he loves you, and he's going to save you. And those are all powerful promises that will never be broken. And so I wanted to show you in the Bible what it actually says about this flood. Everybody knows it rained for 40 days and the world was flooded. Interesting fact, the closeness that science is coming to the Bible, there's still numbers and things like that there's not an agreement on. But science says today that the world experienced a worldwide flood, just as the Bible says the world experienced a worldwide flood. Now, science says that the water level of oceans rose 500 feet, which is interesting. But the Bible says the water level rose probably 16,000 feet. And so you have a radical difference between what the natural science says happened and what the Bible says happened. But regardless of that, they both agree there was a worldwide flood. And in chapter 7, verse 11, about halfway down through verse 11, it actually tells you what happened. It says, on that day, all the springs of the great deep burst forth, and the floodgates of the heavens were opened, and that rain fell on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. So what the Bible is actually telling us, and which science agrees, is that you've got two things going on here. Yes, you have God opening the floodgates of heaven and bringing torrents of rain like the world has never seen and never will see. And that's true. But a lot of times we don't stop and give as much credit to the fact that what actually happened, according to biblical knowledge, is, and science says there was a major, huge, worldwide earthquake at that time that brought on the flood. And the Bible says the same thing. And this earthquake was on the bottom of the ocean. And this earthquake split a fault underneath on the ocean bottom, a fault that went at least 4,350 miles. It about split the earth in two from the North Pole to the South Pole. And out of this huge pressure surged this huge volume of water that, under the power of the explosion, sent the water out of the ocean and into the atmosphere for miles. And then once it had ended its momentum, the water, of course, then fell back down. So the actual rain coming down and the flood developing actually was a combination of water coming down in torrents and water exploding from the Earth's core and going up into the air. It is estimated that the power of that water that was coming down on the earth was 500 times the power of the water that goes over the Niagara Falls. I know Kenya has got great falls, and so they know the falls of their continent. We know the falls of our continent. Niagara is a huge and spectacular waterfall, and so are the same ones in Africa. So if you realize the power of the water coming down from these waterfalls and multiply it 500 times, you have the power of the rain that was coming down on the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Anyone out in it, any animal, any human out in it would die instantly. It would break every bone in your body. You would be crushed immediately. The earth has never experienced that. And so that's the power of what happened. I have some pictures in your notebook, and you'll have to go fishing for them because I didn't put a page number on them, which I should have done. But if you go back a few pages, you will find a copy of this. And up here is an artist's image of what the inside of the ark, Noah's ark, looked like.
It's page 26.
Up here. It was 3 levels. That's what the Bible tells us, 3 levels. And a man took every word of the Bible and studied it, and then he built an ark as close to the specifications that he knew and exactly in the way that they built this ark. And it's on display. And there it is, according to the best description we have, what the ark looked like. It was 475 feet long, which is like a football field and a half. It was absolutely huge. By the standards of that time, it was spectacularly gigantic. And it was like 75 feet across, and I forgot, I think 45 feet high. And so this ark was, 450 feet long, 75 feet wide, and 45 feet high. And this article also tells you that the ark was built with a flat bottom, and I mentioned that last week. And the advantage of that and disadvantage, the disadvantage is that it's harder to guide and it bounces around like a cork. But the advantage of it is that a flat bottom boat doesn't sink. And so since this boat was almost watertight, it never sunk in all of these spectacularly vicious storms that they were having at that time. But you can see how large the ark is by just looking at the people. Down below it, you have a picture of Mount Ararat. Now, Mount Ararat, and Nancy, I said I wasn't going to go to the map. This is what is called Lake Van. I know, it's a strange name in Turkey, Lake Van. It had a more complicated name, but it is called today Van, V-A-N. And Ararat is right off of Lake Van, about down in here. And so that's where Mount Ararat is. So what I want to get into is exactly how these waters of the deep burst forth, as the Bible says. And science has figured this out along with biblical scholars. And what you have is, we have the Earth's surface where we live. And it goes down a little ways. And you have these oceans that set apart our continents. and the oceans are very deep. And at the bottom of the oceans, you have a hard rock, very cold surface. And if you look at this other picture that I pulled with on top picture of what the inside of the ark looked like, but down below that, you have a cutaway of the earth. And if you look at that cutaway of the earth, you'll notice that below the crust of the earth and below our oceans is what is called the mantle. And the mantle is where our lava comes from. It's very hot. And so it's a radically changed condition. And what is believed here, and then as it goes deeper into the core, it continues to get hotter. And what is believed that happened way back then was that the mantle, being hot, began to shrink a little bit. And when it shrunk, it left a space between the mantle and the bottom of the oceans. And so because there was a space here, like a roof collapsing on a house, like ice cubes melting, you can take a glass and fill it with ice cubes and then let it melt, and it's like maybe 1/3 full of water. And that's kind of what happened. And so the mantle shrunk, and the ocean floor, being under enormous pressure, split in this 4,300. By the way, I've got an extra zero. And when you get to the reading of where it says that, it's 43,000. It's not 43,000, it's 4,350 miles long. And that split because of the enormous pressure that is between the ocean floor, which is cold, and the mantle, which is hot right underneath it. And all this water collapsed down out of the sea and through the fault and hit this mantle. And when it hit the mantle, it exploded and went miles up in the sky. And that's where this huge deluge came from. It was rainfall, but not alone rainfall. It was rainfall and the burst of water from the deep that did this. And if you think about that, then you can kind of understand how the water pressure hitting the earth could be 500 times greater than a mighty waterfall. That whole science of those issues happening is called catastrophic tectonics. And that's the study of what happens when the cold surface of the earth hits the hot mantle underneath it. And so that's actually how the flood happened. And I counted the days. It's a little bit difficult. But if you count the days from the time Noah went into the ark and God shut the door, and there were 7 days to wait. And I can imagine myself sweating bullets, thinking that I've gone into the ark, I got all these animals, I got the door shut, and nothing's happening. And God waited 7 days. And I think that one of the reasons God did that was to test and make sure that Noah was up to the task. And Noah never doubted the Lord. The Bible doesn't mention him having any doubts about God coming through. So God waited 7 days, and down comes this deluge of water. So there is actually in the count, I counted, 370 days that Noah and his family and all these animals are on the ark. And the Jewish calendar is 360 days. So it actually, in Jewish terms, it was 1 year and 10 days that Noah and his family spent on the ark. And I would like to now shift to our notebook. And I want to start halfway down page 24. And I want to tell you a lot of amazing factors, historic, discovery type factors that have happened certainly in modern times. And by modern times, I go back to the beginning of the true civilizations of the human race, of what happened here. And I think you'll be amazed at this study. First of all, we have a document, and it would have been Babylonian. And if you look down here under point E, it says reports through history. A Chaldean priest, a Chaldean, remember that would have been the first civilization of Babylon. Second civilization of Babylon. I said it wrong. Second civilization of Babylon. A Chaldean priest, Babylonian, in 475 BC, reported being an eyewitness to a wooden ark on a mountain in East Asia Minor, which is Turkey, which of course is this country right here, and of course Ararat being down here. So he was on some sort of a trek coming out of Babylon and coming up here, and he saw what looked to him to be a wooden ark way up, as it turns out, 14,000 feet up Mount Ararat. Then just a few years later, like in 450 BC, an Egyptian historian that was accompanying an Egyptian army on a military campaign, would have been against the Hittites, up there in southern Turkey, northern Syria. And he also says that he saw an ark, or something like an ark. He actually could use the word, the Babylonian, the first one. The second one, that he saw an ark of wood during a military campaign on Asia Minor. The Turkish government in 1880 sent a surveying crew to survey the damage done by a major earthquake in eastern Turkey. And they also reported an object up in Mount Ararat, 14,000 feet up. Now this starts to get interesting because just 5 years later, that's when this survey crew discovered this wooden ark at 14,000 feet. Now, there have been verifications of a wooden ark up in Mount Ararat in more recent times. In 1885 and in 1952. And one of the fascinating things at the 1952, they got close enough to the Ark area, and also during this time, it was reported that the Ark appeared to have split in two from an avalanche, and part of it went down 3,000 feet. And so you had the Ark split from 14,000 feet, and then another part at 11,000 feet. And what this 1952 expedition discovered was a wooden plank. Now, first of all, there aren't any forests around where Ararat is for 300 miles. So that would mean there is no sawmills anywhere around Ararat for 300 miles. And this is a plank. It is a commercial product. It is not a tree limb. It is not a trunk. It's a plank. And it's 5 feet long and 3 feet wide. And the natural question is, how in the world did it get up there? It would be impossible for some crazy people to drag a plank all the way up to the 11,000 foot level and sit it there as some sort of a practical joke. It's impossible to happen. They brought this plank down in the 1952 expedition, turned it over to the authorities, and the authorities discovered that the wood in the plank was at least 5,000 years old or older. Now, if you take the 5,000 years from now backwards, you start having a situation where your dates are starting to approach what the Bible says about when the ark was there. I mean, it's getting close. They also discovered that in the fibers of the wood, they discovered a salt residue, 5,000-year-old salt residue. There's only one reason you could have a salt residue embedded in a plank, and that would be that it had been exposed to seawater, salt water. They also discovered that the type of wood that the plank was made from is a type of wood that was familiar to the Palestine or the Israelite area down by the Mediterranean Sea. So the wood is Mediterranean. It had salt residue. It is 5,000 years plus old, and they brought this piece down. And it's a finished product. It's not just a hunk of wood. So let's go over and see, if we're on page 25 at the top, it says E, and it says in the last 150 years, there have been 34 independent reports of a wooden object at the 14,000 foot level on Mount Ararat, which is located today where I showed you, which is the Armenian territory. It's part of the nation of Turkey, but the major group there are Armenians, who is a different ethnic group from, in fact, Armenians, many Armenians are Christians, where the Turks are Muslims, and they come from different ethnic groups. Look at E2. This is one of the most specific factors about Noah's Ark. Right at the end of World War II, an Army sergeant that was a radar expert was sent to eastern Turkey to an American military base that pointed its radar at Russia so it could tell if Russia was making any hostile moves toward Europe, towards Turkey, creating a military situation. And that's where he was assigned, and he came up with a large furlough, but he didn't want to spend half of it going back to the United States. Evidently didn't have much family. And so he decided to stay in Turkey and become a big sightseer. And one of the things he did is he bought his way onto an expedition going up Mount Ararat. And he discovered getting close enough to see big chunks of something wooden on Mount Ararat. He did not report it, and he wrote a diary, and he kept it to himself because he wanted a normal life. And he knew that if he was telling people he saw Noah's Ark, his life would be anything but normal. And so he did not tell anyone, but literally on his deathbed, he not only gave testimony of what happened, but he turned his diary over to authorities. And it seems extremely authentic. The Pentagon actually has a series of files on Noah's Ark down in their archives, and it's called the Ararat anomaly. Now, an anomaly is something that doesn't fit into the environment that it's there. Whatever it is, it's something that does not fit in its environment, an anomaly, something very unusual, something that just doesn't seem logical that it could be there. And that's the name the Pentagon gave to these Ararat Noah's the Ark file. H, on that same page of 25H, it says at this time, and what this time was when I did this research was 2010. There were 3 living, independent eyewitnesses who believed that they had seen the remains of the ark. And that was reported on the History Channel on international television, again in 2010. Now, interestingly enough, the 3 living individuals all agreed to take a lie detector test, and all 3 of them passed. Now, what that means, it doesn't mean that they saw the Ark of the Covenant, but it does mean all 3 of them believed they saw the Ark of the Covenant, that they were not lying, that to them they saw it. Noah's Ark. I'm sorry. I'm very sorry. Thank you for catching me. The Ark of the Covenant is a totally different story. I'm talking about Noah's Ark. And I did that on international television. Thank you. If it was just this class, I'd make every one of you promise to never mention that. But it's gone. It's gone out on the airways. And so this is really an interesting point. Now, I have the question very often, and I certainly don't blame it, that people say, well, why don't they just send the best expedition we come up with the latest equipment, and find out for sure what that object is in Mount Ararat? And by the way, that object has been seen by our spy planes back in the 70s and 80s and 90s. How many of you remember the U-2? And some of you remember the U-2 was an airplane that America came up with that could fly higher than anybody, so high it was out of the range of missiles and artillery, at least for a while until Russia got a missile that could catch it. But anyway, my point on the U-2 planes is that over a 30-year period of time, they continued to give reports that they saw this figure, this object, down on Mount Ararat. In 2004, we sent up a very sophisticated satellite. Now, the Hubble satellite and the latest one we just sent up are facing the universe. This one was called Landsat, 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 and its purpose was to face down on the Earth and study the Earth. And I'm sure also watch the Russians and whatever we do with it. And Landsat has identified an object on Mount Ararat that cannot be explained. Therefore, it is an anomaly. Now, why don't people just go up and prove it? Well, first of all, because of the unique terrain of Ararat, it is considered about the most difficult mountain in the world to climb, even more so than Everest. Everest is much taller. That's like, Everest is like 29,000 feet above sea level. Ararat's like 16,000 feet above sea level. So, but Ararat is extremely difficult. Many people say impossible to climb. Secondly, Ararat is in eastern Turkey, which is like the Old West in America. It's literally in many places lawless and governed by warlords and large, organized, criminal, pirate-type organizations. There is not the stability, legal or crime-wise stability in eastern Turkey that certainly you would find in western Turkey. They're extremely different between each other. And thirdly, expeditions cost a lot of money. And when you go on an expedition that has been done a number of times and always come down pretty much with fit, we came down with a wooden plank, that sort of thing. We came down with people who say they saw up ahead through this snowstorm. That's another thing about Ararat, is that the weather can change in minutes. But also, the point being that expeditions are very, very expensive. And you have to have somebody willing to put up a huge amount of money to send a bunch of people in an expedition up Mount Ararat, since it has a reputation for failure. So that's the sort of reason that you have, and that finding the truth is a biblical question, a spiritual question, and not really an economic question or a military question. If it was economic or military, there'd be crews up there all over the place. But since it is spiritual and biblical, there's not nearly the demand for action to take on that. And so for the time being anyway, the Pentagon has files in its archives that say the Ararat anomaly. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. I mean, that's all the research that I have found, and I did this, I taught in a Bible college for 15 years up in Canby Bible College. And they had a really good library. And that's where I did these studies and come up with these kinds of questions and answers. Let's turn to page 26. And here's what some of the information is. I gave you some of this information earlier, and some of it I haven't given you yet. This was also on international television, the History Channel, and it was a program on Noah's flood. And it was in May 5th, 2015. And here's some of the points that it came out with. It came out, number one, that proof now shows that magna flooding took place somewhere around 6,000, possibly to as late as 4,500. So sometime between 6,000 BC down to 4,500 BC, there was a huge flood. This, I think I told you this last week, this flood, the account of this flood taking place is found in the mythology or the legends of 297 different cultures. And I think anybody could ask the question. It's like the plank. How in the world did it get up there unless it was floated up there? And like that, it's the same thing. How can 297 cultures all over the world all be wrong? And so you got to ask that question. I have some of the major cultures listed on another page, which we will get to. But we have like Japan, China, India, the Middle East, South America, Mexico, where ancient cultures, even an American Indian culture, that all state that there was a giant flood in ancient history. They have found cities. In Japan, they've found a relatively sophisticated city under the Sea of Japan. I told you last week they have found over 200 communities under the Black Sea. Now, people don't build cities under the water. At least we think not, unless they've got gills and things like that. And so obviously each one of these cultures built their community in a place that they felt was very safe and reliable. That makes human sense, doesn't it? And yet all these places have ended up under these oceans. Well, it seems to me that the only way it could happen would have been for a gigantic movement of water. And so you have these questions that you just can't answer. And I told you that science says there was a gigantic flood that was caused through a combination, get this, combination of a huge worldwide earthquake and the melting of the ice age. That's what they say. And they say that the water level raised 500 feet. That would mean any place, which I think is Salem, Oregon, that it has an elevation of 500 feet above sea level or less, would be under the Black Sea again. Just like it, we'd be under the Black Sea. So science is coming together with the Bible. Now, we don't agree upon the level of the water. Where science says 500 feet, the Bible says 16,000 feet, because the Bible tells you that the water was 20 feet over the mountaintops. Now, if this is local, which I believe it would be, and God said it's 20 feet over the mountaintops, people would look at Mount Ararat and say 16,000 feet. If it was a worldwide point of view that I don't think anyone would have had at that time, you'd say, well, Everest is 29,000 feet above sea level. So anyway, you can guess at how deep and how big the biblical statement is, but it is huge. And but that is the only difference pretty much between the science point of view and the biblical point of view, is how much water actually was there. So I'm going to go down here. There's one other point, and I know I've made it, but there's one other study. In point number 7 on page 26, it says the research was done on Mount Ararat by three separate geological teams that in different times, as early as 1995 and as late as 2004, so you got a 9-year period of time when there were 3 geological expeditions, and all 3 parties, about the flood, all 3 parties have consistent results. They all 3 came back with the same evidence. And these are scientific geological expeditions. A fascinating point down at the bottom here is the Chinese character for boat. The Chinese character for boat has 3 symbols. The first symbol, which kind of looks like an A, means vessel. The second symbol in the word that looks kind of like a lopsided table is the symbol for the number 8. And the bottom figure, which looks like a lopsided square, is the symbol for mouths or persons. So think about this. The Chinese culture has a word for boat that comes out to being a vessel with 8 people on it. Now, of all the numbers on this planet you could pick, why would the Japanese pick the number 8? That's exactly the size of Noah's family. And so you can just take that as it stands. God bless you. I want to now go to the Continental Drift. Many of you probably know that the flood caused the positioning of our continents. Science and the Bible both agree that in early creation, what God created, or science says was there, is one huge continent. In Russia, it is called Rodinia, which means motherland. In most of the rest of the world, it's called, I gotta get my glasses on, Pangaea. Pangaea. But whether you call it Pangaea or Rodinia, the fact remains that the original formation of planet Earth had one huge continent. And both science and the Bible says it's the flood that split it up. In the Bible, in chapter 10, it says that when they came off the ark, the people were divided. What does that mean? Well, one of the belief systems that it means we were split up into different continents. The people were divided. And science, of course, is very specific about that. And that huge continent, for example, it is a known fact that Great Britain at one time was part of the European continent. It was hooked on to France mainly. And geologists now say that the separation of Great Britain from Europe definitely happened in this flood, proving the continental drift. And not only that, but they say it's possible that that happened in one day. Now remember, one of the biggest factors between science and the Bible really isn't so much whether something happened or not. That is an issue, but it's becoming less of an issue. But the big issue is, how did it happen? Science, evolutionists, Darwinists believe that changes, all these changes, happen slowly and gradually. Evolution. You know, fish getting feet, the fish with feet coming up on its landscape, the fish turning into a turtle, turning into a lion, and into a man. You know, that's kind of a theory, that happens gradually. The Bible says there isn't enough time in existence. Remember I told you, and this is actually a fact, it was in the Oregon Statesman, that the original, whatever you want to call it, organism, I guess, that led to the human race was a little tiny bitty round thing about the size of a grain of sand that was mostly a mouth. A mouth. A mouth. So I personally take that as an insult that I came from something that was basically a mouth. But you never can tell. But yes, I can tell. That is the most ridiculous thing. And I'm sorry I'm saying this on international television, but I think that's so ridiculous. But nevertheless, the science point of view is that things change slowly and gradually. It's like a glacier slipping down through mountains. It happens very slowly and it happens gradually, and you can't stop it. You cannot stop it, but it's very, very, very slow, maybe inches in a number of years. Okay, where the Bible tells us that with the supernatural power of God, that things don't change slowly and gradually, they change suddenly and violently, boom, and they happen. And so that's the basic major difference between the scientific natural point of view and the biblical supernatural point of view. The scientific point of view is I believe this because I know it, or I think I know it. Where the biblical point of view is I believe it because I trust the one who did it. So that's your choice. How much are you as a natural being willing to accept the power and the existence of a supernatural force, which we call God? And how many of you will trust completely in the promises of God, Yahweh, and Jesus Christ? If your answer is fully, then you have no problem with this. So, anyway, going back to my notes. Oh, here on page 28. I have a list down here. Yeah, I have a list down here on page 28 of the major or most largest cultures that have a story about the floods. And it is in Genesis 10, verse 32, which, what?
It's 32.
32, that's what I said.
Yeah. It's our page 32 is your 29. Just keep going.
Okay, keep going. All right. So anyway, the point of the biblical reference is Genesis 10, verse 32, that talks about the people that came off the ark started to become divided. And I do have a map which we will go into. Why not now? 1 minute? Oh, well, we won't. But anyway, on this map that I will show you next week, you will see that the three sons of Noah migrated to largely different areas, different continents. And then you look at that verse that says they came off the ark and were divided. It makes sense to connect those 2 points of view. Yes, they were divided. Shem was in the Middle East, Ham was in Africa, and Japheth was in Europe. And so you have the very answer to that question right in historical history. Thank you very much for being here. I had a very nice time. I hope you did. I want to ask God to bless you this week and give you rest and assurance. And good night.